Everyone in town thought she was crazy. She rejected 3 job offers in a single day. But one cowboy noticed something nobody else did. So he asked her one question that would change everything. The morning sun rose slowly over the wide amber plains outside the quiet town of Red Hollow, where dust floated in the air like drifting memories, and the wind carried the scent of dry grass and distant rain. And along the wooden porch of a small roadside diner, a tall cowboy named Silas Boone leaned against a railing, watching the world move slowly the way it always did in that town. Silas was a man carved by years of riding fences, chasing stray cattle, and sleeping beneath endless skies. His hat shaded a pair of sharp, thoughtful eyes that seemed to notice things others missed. And that morning, those eyes noticed something unusual across the street near the old brick building that held the offices of 3 different companies. A young woman stood there, dressed neatly but simply, holding a folder against her chest while speaking to a man in a grey suit who shook her hand and then turned away, leaving her standing alone. Silas watched as she looked down at the paper in her hands, folded it slowly, and then stepped away from the doorway. Not angry, not upset, just quiet and thoughtful, as if the moment meant less to her than it should have. She crossed the street, sat on a bench beneath a fading sign that read Red Hollow Employment Center, and looked out toward the road with calm, steady eyes, like someone waiting for something no one else could see. An hour passed, and another man approached her, this one wearing a blue tie and carrying a clipboard. He spoke to her for several minutes, nodding politely, gesturing toward the building behind him. But after a short conversation, she shook her head, gently stood up, and handed the clipboard back before walking away again. Not hurried, not frustrated, simply certain. Silas shifted his weight against the railing. Curious now, most people in Red Hollow would have taken the first job offered without hesitation. Work was work, and the town was small, but this woman had just turned down 2 offers without a second thought. By midday, the heat rolled across the town like a heavy blanket. The diner door creaked open and closed as truck drivers and ranch hands stepped in and out for coffee and pie. But Silas remained on the porch, watching as the woman returned once again, this time meeting a third man outside the building, this one older, with silver hair and the confident smile of someone who believed every conversation would end his way. They talked longer than the others, nearly 15 minutes. Silas could not hear the words, but he could see the rhythm of the exchange. The man speaking with enthusiasm, the woman listening carefully, nodding occasionally, then finally shaking her head once more, handing back the paper and thanking him before turning away. 3 offers, 3 refusals. Silas pushed himself off the railing and walked across the street, his boots kicking dust along the road. The woman now sat again on the bench, her folder resting beside her as she watched. A line of clouds forming far across the plains. He stopped a few feet away, tipping his hat slightly the way his father had taught him years ago. Morning, he said, though the sun had already climbed high. She looked up, meeting his gaze without hesitation, her eyes clear, steady, curious. Morning, she replied. Silas studied her for a moment, then glanced toward the office building behind them. So you turned down 3 jobs today, he said. The woman smiled faintly, not embarrassed, not defensive, simply amused. Yes, she said. Silas rested one boot on the edge of the bench railing. Most folks around here would have taken the first one, he said. Most folks are looking for a job, she answered. He tilted his head slightly. And you are not. She paused for a moment, as if weighing how much to reveal to a stranger. No, she said softly, I am looking for something else. The wind moved through the dry grass beside the road, carrying the distant sound of a train whistle across the valley. Silas folded his arms, considering her words. Finally, he asked the question that had been sitting quietly in his mind since the morning. What are you really looking for? For the first time, the woman hesitated, her gaze drifting toward the endless stretch of land beyond the town. The horizon glowing beneath the wide-open sky. My name is Elara Quinn, she said. Silas nodded. Silas Boone. She studied him briefly, as if deciding whether he was the kind of person who could hear the truth. Then she spoke slowly. I'm looking for a place where what I can do actually matters. Silas chuckled softly. That sounds like most folks' dreams, he said. Maybe, she replied, but most people stop looking for it. The wind lifted a strand of her dark hair across her face, and she brushed it aside calmly. Silas leaned back against the bench rail again. What can you do? He asked. Ilara opened the folder beside her, pulling out several neatly organized pages. I solve problems, she said. Silas raised an eyebrow. That is a mighty broad skill. She nodded. Yes, but it is a useful one. He studied the papers briefly, though the numbers and notes meant little to him. You a numbers person? He asked. Among other things, she said. Silas glanced toward the fields beyond town. You ever worked a ranch? No, she said. You afraid of hard work? No! Silas smiled slightly. Well, that is a start. Ilara looked at him with quiet curiosity. You hiring Mr. Boone? Silas shrugged. Not exactly, but I might know someone who could use a problem solver. She leaned forward, slightly interested now. Who? Silas turned his gaze toward the far hills where the Boone Ridge Ranch stretched across thousands of acres, though lately those acres had been struggling beneath poor seasons, broken equipment, and problems that never seemed to end. Me, he said, and for the first time that day, Ilara Quinn smiled, in a way that hinted her long search might finally be nearing its answer. The sun was beginning to sink behind the wide hills of Red Hollow when Silas Boone and Ilara Quinn walked along the dusty road leading toward the Boone Ridge Ranch. The land stretched endlessly in every direction, waves of dry grass bending under, the slow wind while distant cattle moved like dark shadows across the golden fields. The ranch had once been the pride of the valley, a place where strong fences steady horses, and honest work built a future for anyone willing to stay. But over the last few years, the place had grown quiet, the barns needed repairs, the pastures had been neglected, and problems had begun, stacking up like storm clouds that refused to leave yet. Silas had stayed because leaving had never been part of who he was, and now walking beside him was a woman who had refused 3 easy jobs because she believed she was meant to find something that mattered more. Ilara walked with calm, steady steps, her eyes studying the land, the fences, the barns, the windmills, the long dirt road leading toward the main house. She noticed things quickly, the way a person does when their mind is always measuring and understanding patterns. Silas noticed that about her, and it reminded him of something his father once said long ago, that the right person can see a broken place, not as failure, but as possibility. They reached the wooden gate at the entrance of Boone Ridge Ranch. The old iron hinges creaked softly. When Silas pushed it open, the sound echoing across the quiet field, and for a moment both of them simply stood there looking out over the land. This place used to run smoother than a river after spring rain, Silas said quietly. What changed? Ilara asked. Silas let out a slow breath. Too many small problems ignored for too long, equipment. Breaking fences, falling water lines, leaking cattle wandering off, and not enough people willing to stay and fix it. Ilara nodded slightly, absorbing every word. Problems rarely arrive alone, she said softly. They travel in groups. Silas smiled at that. You might fit here after all, he said. They continued walking until they reached the ranch house, an old wooden building sitting proudly at the center of the land, its wide porch facing the sunset. The boards creaked under their boots as they stepped up, and Silas pushed open the door. Inside the house, the air smelled faintly of dust, leather, and coffee. A large wooden table sat near the window, covered with papers, maps, tools, and notebooks. The chaos of someone trying to manage too many responsibilities alone. Ilara stepped closer. Studying the table, she began flipping through the papers, quickly scanning numbers, notes, repair lists, schedules, and supply orders. Silas watched her carefully. After several minutes, she looked up. You are not failing because the ranch is weak, she said. You are failing because everything depends on you. Silas leaned against the wall, thinking about that. That is what happens when people leave, he said. Ilara shook her head slightly. No, that is what happens when systems are missing. She began organizing the papers into separate stacks: equipment, cattle, water, fences, finances, schedules. Silas watched the transformation unfold in silence. You see problems, she said without looking up. But problems are only puzzles waiting for someone patient enough to solve them. The room grew quiet again, except for the soft sound of papers moving across the table, and the wind whispering through the fields outside. After a while, Ilara stepped back from the table. First thing tomorrow, we check every water line. She said, cattle follow water. If water fails, everything fails. Silas nodded, slowly impressed. Second, we repair the south fence. That gap is costing you cattle every week. He nodded again. Third, you stop trying to fix everything alone. Silas chuckled softly. That last one might be the hardest. Ilara smiled slightly. Then we start with the easy ones. The next week's changed Boone Ridge Ranch, in ways the valley had not seen in years. Ilara approached every challenge like a puzzle, mapping the land, organizing the work, creating systems that made the ranch move like a living machine instead of a struggling collection of problems. She found local workers who had once left because the work felt endless and chaotic, but when they returned, they discovered something different. Clear plans, steady leadership, and the feeling that their effort actually mattered. Silas rode the fences each morning, watching the changes unfold, broken windmills spinning again, new water troughs filling under the sun, cattle returning to strong pastures, the barns filled with activity and laughter that had not echoed there in years. But more than anything, Silas noticed the way Ilara walked through the ranch with quiet confidence. She was not chasing money or titles. She was building something real, something that improved every life connected to the land. One evening, as the sky turned deep orange and the wind carried the smell of rain across the hills, Silas found Ilara standing on the ridge overlooking the valley. You turned down 3 jobs in town, he said, walking beside her. Yes, she replied calmly. Do you regret it? She looked across the fields where workers were finishing the day. Cattle moving peacefully in the distance, the ranch alive again. No, she said quietly. Silas studied her face. You found what you were looking for. Ilara smiled gently. Not exactly. Silas raised an eyebrow. Then what? She turned toward him. I found a place where what I do matters, she said. Silas looked out across Boone Ridge Ranch. The land stronger than it had been in years, the problems slowly disappearing beneath steady hands and clear thinking. The wind moved through the tall grass like a quiet applause from the earth itself. Silas Boone tipped his hat slightly toward the horizon. Funny thing, he said, when I asked what you were looking for, I thought you were searching for a job. Ilara shook her head softly. I was searching for a purpose. The sun disappeared behind the hills, leaving the sky glowing with the last light of the day, and below them, Boone Ridge Ranch stood alive once more, not because of luck or chance, but because 2 people had chosen something harder than comfort. They had chosen to build something that mattered. And as the first stars appeared above the quiet plains, the future of the ranch stretched forward like the open horizon, endless, strong, and waiting for the next problem to become the next solution.